So one of the most common questions that I get is, John, do you have any recommendations for teaching resources or books? And the answer is most certainly yes. Now, I'm eventually going to be offering my own course very soon. This is the first time that I've publicly announced this, so keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, I'm going to show you some of the books that I have found incredibly helpful in sort of developing my design sensibilities throughout the years. One thing I want to mention is that the books that I'm about to recommend to you can actually be bought if you click the links in the description down below. If you click the links in the description down below, it actually gives me a small commission and it doesn't cost you anything extra. So if you want to buy these books, this is a really good way for you to get the book and also support this channel so that I can continue to create more content. Once again, I would really appreciate it if you did that. Of course, no pressure, only buy the books if you actually want them. Now, the books that I'm about to recommend are actually books that I have personally read. I think I've read every single one of them in their entirety except for one. There's one book that I've read maybe like half of, and I'll mention that specific one. So the first book that I want to talk about is a book called Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. This book is amazing. This is probably one of the best primers on industrial design, UX design, etc., etc. There's actually a revised edition that covered more digital examples as well, sometime in the middle, I think around 2015 or so. And this is a really good book. You'll notice that, I've like marked the crap out of it. I don't know if you can see from here, but everything is marked up. I have a ton of notes on this. I think that this is a really great book, and I actually cite it quite a few times throughout my videos. So this is a really, really good primer on the fundamentals of industrial design. I highly recommend it to anyone. The next book I want to talk about is called Designing for Growth. Oh, there's a piece of paper in here. Space fan. Anyway, the next book I recommend is called Designing for Growth. This is a really, really great book, and basically it provides a toolkit for design through the lens of growing a business. And this is really, really important. If you want to move beyond just pixel pushing in your career, this is how you do it. Read this book. It talks to you about how to go through ideation processes and design thinking through the lens of how to help a business. It's actually specifically a design thinking toolkit for managers, but I also think it's a really, really great sort of primer on design thinking for your average industrial designer. The next book we have here is actually quite similar. It's called Value Proposition Design. Now, this book is quite similar to Designing for Growth. It basically talks about several ways to come up with value propositions and make viable businesses through the lens of design thinking. This book is a little bit more illustrative, like they show more graphs and tables and stuff like that. It is a little bit more focused on the business of design, but it's really, really good if you're like a more junior designer and you want to sort of make it to that next level. Even if you're a student, if you're thinking about these things for your next internship, it's going to put you in a good position to basically succeed in your career if you understand the underlying business principles of how design can serve a company. The next book I want to talk about is a little bit different. This book is called Elements of Design, and it's basically chronicling the work of Rowena Reed Costello, and she is pretty much one of the big sort of contributors to formal modern design education. She was a professor at Pratt Institute for the better part of several decades, the better part of the 20th century, basically. And this book basically chronicles a lot of her work. A lot of the work that I've done in these videos, when I talk about like the silhouette, subshapes, and details, are based on these principles in this book. Now, it's a little bit high level, and because it's sort of like a second-hand account, it's by Gail Greet Hanna, it's not by Rowena Reed Costello. Because of that, it's not super complete, but it's still really cool. I highly recommend it. It sort of gives some good fundamental design advice that I would recommend, and it's just good to know who Rowena Reed Costello was as a designer. The next book we're going to talk about is Manufacturing Processes for Design Professionals. Now, this is the book that I have not read all of. If you look at it, it's very thick. And I have read a lot of it, but it's pretty cool. Basically, it goes through just about every manufacturing process you could imagine. It has a lot of pictures, and it actually goes through several case studies throughout the book. And it talks about, like, you know, when you would use these processes and all that kind of stuff. So if you're trying to understand materials in manufacturing and how to build things, this is a great book to look at. This is really important because if you're trying to get a job as an industrial designer, it's very important that you understand how things are made. Now, obviously, the mechanical engineers are going to be the ones who sort of send out the final factory drawings to the manufacturer, or you know, they're basically going to sign off on the final manufactured files. But you still need to understand this stuff, because what can happen is the engineers will be making the design decisions, and it's going to end very poorly, trust me. So the better you understand manufacturing, the better you will be as a designer. I highly recommend Manufacturing Processes for Design Professionals. And then the last book I want to talk about is a little different. This is just called Design: The Definitive Visual History. It's by Smithsonian. Now, this one is really interesting because it basically talks about every single industrial design and architectural movement of the past several hundred years. And it's sort of like a basic primer of everything that has happened in that time. Like, I just sort of opened up to streamlining here. So this is streamlining, and it talks about every single design movement that happened and what the cultural and historical context was and what each legacy was for each of these movements. And it talks about individual designers as well. I highly recommend it. It is a little bit surface level because it's covering, you know, hundreds of years of history, but it's sort of a good primer. It's a good sort of like introduction to each of these various design movements. I highly recommend this as well. So that pretty much covers the books that I wanted to discuss. There are some other design tools that I use, and probably the biggest one is the ballpoint pen, and I actually have one right here. So this is the Schneider Slider Edge XB. This is a great, great pen. I highly recommend it. This is what I use to sketch by hand. It is probably the most commonly used tool that I use. Highly recommend it. Obviously, you know, I use a MacBook Pro, although I'll probably be switching over to PC very soon. And those are pretty much the main tools that I use. It's a pen and paper and my computer. I think that pretty much covers the video. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe. It does help me out. If you want to buy these books, click the links in the description below. Once again, it helps the channel out. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and it does help me out. It gives me a minor commission so I can continue making these kinds of videos. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for checking out the video, and I hope you have a great day.